Texas, Mr. Carter, for 60 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate being recognized. I sure enjoyed hearing from my colleagues talking about the work of the day in I think, a very accurate way. I'm here tonight to talk about, I think, correcting some potential inequities. My history is, I'm very blessed in my life. I spent 10 years practicing law in the town of Round Rock, Texas, in Williamson County, at that time a small town where a lawyer in that town pretty well did anything that walked in the door, from criminal cases all the way down to property tax cases. And I had a lot of clients back in those days that were in small businesses or might be individuals who sometimes would, I would say unintentionally, fail to pay some of the taxes that they owed to the IRS. And inevitably, when those things would happen, they would receive from the IRS a notice that they had failed to pay their taxes or failed to file their income tax or failed to pay payroll taxes that they should have paid. And these clients would come running to the lawyer. That time I was only one of two lawyers in town and never claimed to be a tax expert. But I could read the form that told us what they needed to do, and we could get them with a CPA, and they would get their taxes filed, and they would receive a notice from the IRS, which would tell them that they would have to pay penalties and interest on this particular sum of money, whatever it may be. It might have been relatively small, but if the time period had been long, the penalties would be very horrendous. They would be very, very fierce. And sometimes you might, over a period of time of, say, 8 or 10 years of failure to pay, you might see the penalties and interest be 2, 3, 4 times what the actual taxes were that were owed by the individual. If it happened to be payroll taxes, I will tell you that by my experience in those days, they would threaten to padlock businesses and put people in prison for that, for failing to pay payroll taxes, because actually that was other people's money that they withheld and then didn't pay their matching share. And so the IRS would get very mad about failing to pay payroll taxes. But they would also be a little bit upset about failing to pay income taxes and threaten similar actions, mostly padlocking businesses and seizing assets. And it was possible to go talk with the IRS, and you could sometimes negotiate those penalties and interest, but I never saw them not assess them in my period of time that I did that. After that 10 years of practicing law, I spent 20 years as a general jurisdiction district judge in Texas, which is the highest trial court in Texas, and tries a wide variety of cases, some of which is family law. I tried a tremendous amount of family law cases, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 over that 20-year period of time, and also criminal cases and so forth. And in many, many family law cases, one of the issues when you were trying to divide assets, you would also be dividing liabilities, and one of the liabilities you would inevitably see would be failure to pay taxes, or being late on taxes, or failing to file taxes. So we dealt with this same issue, and I can report to this body that by my experience, the failure to pay those taxes always seemed to result in a letter from the IRS assessing penalties and interest for failure to pay. Now, I raise this issue because I think that it's important that we have fairness, that everyone be treated fairly in this country. And so many will recall that it was reported by a member of this Congress on this House floor about 4 or 5 months ago. One of our members, a very well-respected, highly respected member of this body, told us that he had failed to pay his taxes for a period of 10 years on a rental property in the Dominican Republic. And he reported that he was going to, through his people, he was going to discuss with the IRS the payment of these taxes, and he was going to pay his taxes. And he has since reported that he has paid his taxes to the tune of somewhere in the sum of $10,000. He also has reported that he has not paid any penalties and interest because no penalties and interest have been assessed. Now, this struck me as very strange. By my experience in having dealt with this, and I'm not saying I did this full time every day, but I think most Americans know, if they've been through anything they've dealt with the IRS is pretty proud of assessing penalties and interest. They like that a whole lot. And so to me it was at first curious that this person who is very directly related to the taxing system of the United States has in fact not been even assessed any penalties and interest. And I thought, we serve in this body here because a bunch of people back home actually said, we'd like you to represent us in Washington, and we think you think like we do, and so they vote for you and they give you this job. But at least in my personal opinion, that makes us no different from them, other than we're kind of hired to speak for them up here as the best we can. And I think that's what we're here for. But we certainly, by the nature of our employment in the House of Representatives, should not receive any special treatment above and beyond the same special treatment that would be available to every American citizen, every American taxpayer. So I've introduced a bill today which would basically say that because no penalties and interest were assessed against a member of this House, that in fact to have equal treatment under the law, which is one of our constitutional rights, we would allow people to claim that same right not to pay penalties and interest if they hadn't paid their taxes. This bill has got a name, and we call it the Rangel Rule. I would hope that people would take it in the light that it is set. It is not criticism in any way of any member of this House. In fact, if it's criticism of anything, it's a criticism of the IRS of the United States for failure to treat people equally under the law. And so I raise this issue because, in fact, that's what I seek here by this legislation, equal treatment under the law. That club owner that I was well aware of back in the 70s who constantly was having trouble with the IRS, and he's dead now, so I'm not going to use his name, but I represent him for the IRS a half a dozen times, and we battled tooth and nail and borrowed money to pay that principal, interest, and penalty that he had to pay. If there's someone that's given special consideration, then that man should have been given special consideration. And that's why I have introduced this bill, which basically says that if you have failed to pay your taxes and you are willing to pay the taxes and you don't want penalties and interest assessed against you, then you can claim the Rangel Rule and you won't have penalties and interest assessed against you according to law. That's what we're doing here today. We're not doing it out of any malice. We're only doing it because we think it's fair for the American people. I'm joined by some of my colleagues here. I will first yield, I think, to my friend from Iowa, Mr. King.